Genius Kids. Cultivating love for learning.
Chapter 7 The Thieves. Many years ago, when oak trees now past their prime were about as large as elderly gentlemen's walking sticks, there lived in Wessex a yeoman's son, whose name was Hubert. He was about 14 years of age, and was as remarkable for his candour and lightness of heart as for his physical courage, of which, indeed, he was a little vain. On one cold Christmas Eve, his father, having no other help at hand, sent him on an important errand to a small town several miles from home. He travelled on horseback, and was detained by the business till a late hour of the evening. At last, however, it was completed. He returned to the inn, where the horse was saddled, and started on his way. His journey homeward lay through the Vale of Blackmoor, a fertile but somewhat lonely district with heavy clay roads and crooked lanes. In those days, too, a great part of it was thickly wooded. It must have been about 9 o'clock when, riding along the overhanging trees upon his stout-legged cob Jerry, and singing a Christmas carol to be in harmony with the season, Hubert fancied that he heard a noise among the boughs. This recalled to his mind that the spot he was traversing bore an evil name. Men had been waylaid there. He looked at Jerry, and wished he had been of any other colour than light grey, for, on this account, the docile animal's form was visible even here in the dense shade. "What do I care?" he said aloud. After a few minutes of reflection, "Jerry's legs are too nimble to allow any highwayman to come near me. Ha! Ha!" Indeed, someone said in a deep voice, and the next moment a man darted from the thicket on his right, another man from the thicket on his right, another man from the thicket on his left, and another from a tree trunk a few yards ahead. Hubert's bridle was seized. He was pulled from his horse, and although he struck out with all his might, just as a brave boy would naturally do, he was overpowered. His arms were tied behind him, his legs bound tightly together, and he was thrown into the ditch. The robbers, whose faces he could now dimly perceive to be artificially blackened, at once fled, leading off the horse. When Hubert recovered himself, he found that by great exertion he was able to extricate his legs from the cord, but in spite of every endeavour, his arms remained bound as fast as before. All, therefore, that he could do was to rise to his feet and proceed on his way with his arms tied behind him, and trust to chance for getting them unfastened. He knew that it would be impossible to reach home on foot that night, and in such a condition, but he walked on. Owing to the confusion which this attack caused in his brain, he lost his way, and would have been inclined to lie down and rest till morning among the dead leaves had he not known the danger of sleeping without wrappers in a frost so severe. Word meaning: candour, candidness, detained, kept from proceeding, traversing, travelling across, perceive, to observe or recognize. So he wandered further onwards, his arms wrung and numbed by the cord which pinned him, and his heart aching for the loss of poor Jerry, who never had been known to kick, or bite, or show a single vicious habit. Just then, he discerned through the trees a distant light. Towards this he made his way, and found himself in front of a large mansion with flanking wings, gables, and towers, the battlements, and shaping up against the stars. All was silent, but the door stood wide open, it being from this door that the light shone which had attracted him. On entering he found himself in a vast apartment arranged as a dining hall, and brilliantly illuminated. The walls were covered with a great deal of dark carvings, closet doors, and the usual fittings of a house of that kind. But what drew his attention most was the large table in the midst of the hall, upon which was spread a sumptuous supper, as yet untouched. Chairs were placed around, and it appeared as if something had occurred to interrupt the meal just at the time when all were ready to begin. Even had Hubert been so inclined, he could not have eaten in his helpless state, unless by dipping his mouth into the dishes, like a pig or cow. He wished first to obtain assistance, and was about to penetrate further into the house for that purpose when he heard hasty footsteps in the porch, and the words, "Be quick," uttered in the same deep voice which had reached him when he was dragged from the horse. There was only just time for him to dart under the table before three men entered the dining hall. Peeping from beneath the hanging edges of the tablecloth, he perceived that their faces, too, were blackened, which at once removed any remaining doubts he may have felt that these were the same thieves. "Now then," said the first, the man with the deep voice, "let us hide ourselves. They will all be back again in a minute." "That was a good trick to get them out of the house, eh?" "Yes. You imitated well the cries of a man in distress," said the second. "Excellently," said the third. "But they will soon find out that it was false alarm. Come, where shall we hide? It must be some place we can stay in for 2 or 3 hours. Till all are in bed and asleep. Ah, I have learnt that the further closet is open once in 12 months. It will serve our purpose exactly." The speaker advanced into a corridor which led from the hall. Creeping a little farther forward, Hubert could discern that the closet stood at the end, facing the dining hall. The thieves entered it, and closed the door behind them. Hardly breathing, Hubert glided forward, to learn a little more of their intention, if possible, and, coming close, he could hear the robbers whispering about the different rooms where the jewels, plates and other valuables of the house were kept, which they plainly meant to steal. They had not been long in hiding when a gay chattering of ladies and gentlemen was audible on the terrace. Hubert felt that it would not do to be caught prowling about the house, unless he wished to be taken for a robber himself, and he slipped softly back to the hall, out at the door, and stood in a dark corner of the porch, where he could see everything without being seen himself. In a moment or two, a whole troop of people came gliding past him into the house. There were an elderly gentleman and lady, 8 or 9 young ladies, as many young men, besides half-dozen men servants and maids. The mansion had apparently been quite emptied of its occupants. Word meaning: midst, the middle part, sumptuous, splendid, penetrate, to enter into, discern, to detect. "Now, children and young people, we will resume our meal," said the old gentleman. "What the noise could have been I cannot understand. I never felt so certain in my life that there was a person being murdered outside my door." Then the ladies began saying how frightened they had been, and how they had expected an adventure, and how it had ended in nothing after all. "Wait a while," said Hubert to himself. "You will have adventure enough by and by, ladies." The door was then closed, Hubert being left outside in the porch. It appeared that the young men and women were married sons and daughters of the old couple who had come that day to celebrate Christmas with their parents. He thought this a proper moment for asking their assistance, and, since he was unable to knock with his hands, he began to kick the door. "Hullo! What noise are you making here?" said a footman who opened it, and, seizing Hubert by the shoulder, he pulled him into the dining hall. "Here's a strange boy I have found making a noise in the porch, Sir Simon." Everybody turned to look at Hubert. "Bring him forward," said Sir Simon, the old gentleman commanded. "What were you doing there, my boy?" "Why, his arms are tied," said one of the ladies. "Poor fellow," said another. Hubert at once began to explain that he had been waylaid on his journey home, robbed of his horse, and mercilessly left in this condition by the thieves. "Only to think of it!" exclaimed Sir Simon. "That's a likely story," said one of the guests, incredulously. "Doubtful, hey?" asked Sir Simon. "Perhaps he's robber himself," suggested a lady. "There is a curiously wild, wicked look about him, certainly, now that I examine him closely," said the old mother. Hubert blushed with shame, and instead of continuing his story and relating that the robbers were concealed in the house, he doggedly held his tongue and half resolved to let them find out their danger for themselves. "Well, untie him," said Sir Simon. "Come, since it is Christmas Eve, we will treat him well. Here, my lad, sit down in that empty seat at the bottom of the table and make as good a meal as you can. When you have had your fill, we will listen to more particulars of your story." The feast then proceeded, and Hubert, now at liberty, was not at all sorry to join in. The more they ate and drank, the merrier did the company become. The logs flared up the chimney. Word meaning: adventure, a risk, seizing, holding forcibly, incredulously, showing doubtfully, doggedly, stubbornly. The ladies laughed at the gentlemen's stories. In short, all went as noisily and as happily as a Christmas gathering in old times possibly could. Hubert, in spite of his hurt feelings at their doubts of his honesty, could not help being warmed both in mind and in body by the good cheer. At last he laughed as heartily at their stories and repartees as the old baronet, Sir Simon, himself. When the meal was almost over, one of the sons said to Hubert, "Well, my boy, how are you? Can you take a pinch of snuff?" He held out one of the snuff boxes, which were then quite common among young and old throughout the country. "Thank you," said Hubert, accepting a pinch. "Tell the ladies who you are, what you are made of, and what you can do," the young man continued, slapping Hubert upon the shoulder. "Certainly," said our hero, drawing himself up and thinking it best to put a bold face on the matter. "I am a traveling magician, indeed. What shall we hear next? Can you call up spirits from the vasty deep, young wizard?" "I can conjure up a tempest in a cupboard," Hubert replied. "Ha ha," said the old baronet, pleasantly rubbing his hands. "We must see this performance. Girls, don't go away, here's something to be seen." "Not dangerous, I hope," said the old lady. Hubert rose from the table. "Hand me your snuff box, please," he said to the young man who had made fun of him. "And now," he continued, without the least noise, "follow me. If any of you speak, it will break the spell." They promised obedience. He entered the corridor and, taking off his shoes, went on tiptoe to the closet door, the guests advancing in a silent group at a little distance behind him. Hubert next placed a stool in front of the door and, by standing upon it, was tall enough to reach to the top. He then, just as noiselessly, poured all the snuff from the box along the upper edge of the door and, with a few short puffs of breath, blew the snuff through the chink into interior of the closet. He held up his finger to the assembly that they must be silent. "Dear me, what's that?" said the old lady, after a minute or two had elapsed. A suppressed sneeze was heard from inside the closet. Hubert held up his finger again. "How very singular," whispered Sir Simon. "This is most interesting." Hubert took advantage of the moment to gently slide the bolt of the closet door into its place. "More snuff," he said, calmly. "More snuff," said Sir Simon. 2 or 3 gentlemen passed their boxes, and the contents were blown in at the top of the closet. Another sneeze, not quite so well suppressed as the first, was heard, then well suppressed as the first, was heard, then another, which seemed to say that it would not be suppressed under any circumstances whatever. At length there arose a perfect storm of sneezes. Word meaning: wizard, a magician, conjure, to do clever tricks. Snuff, tobacco, elapsed, past. Excellent, excellent for one so young, said Sir Simon. I am much interested in this trick of throwing the voice called, I believe, ventriloquism. More snuff, said Hubert. More snuff, added Sir Simon. Sir Simon's man brought a large jar of the best scented scotch. Hubert once more charged the upper chink of the closet, and blew the snuff into the interior, as before. Again he charged, emptying the whole contents of the jar. The tumult of sneezes became really extraordinary to listen to. There was no cessation. It was like wind, rain, and sea battling in a hurricane. I believe there are men inside, and that it is no trick at all, exclaimed Sir Simon, the truth flashing on him. There are, said Hubert. They came to rob the house, and they are the same who stole my horse. The sneezes changed to spasmodic groans. One of the thieves, hearing Hubert's voice, cried, Oh, mercy! Mercy! Let us out of this. Where's my horse? Asked Hubert. Tied to the tree in the hollow behind Short's gibbet. Mercy! Mercy! Let us out, or we shall die of suffocation. All the Christmas guests now perceived that this was no longer a sport, but serious earnest. Guns and cudgels were procured, all the men servants were called in, and arranged in position outside the closet. At a signal, Hubert withdrew the bolt, and stood on the defensive. But the three robbers, far from attacking them, were found crouching in the corner, gasping for breath. They made no resistance, and, being pinioned, were placed in an outhouse till the morning. Hubert now shared the remainder of his story with the assembled company, and was profusely thanked for the services he had rendered. Sir Simon pressed him to stay over the night, and accept the use of the best bedroom the house afforded, which had been occupied by Queen Elizabeth and King Charles successively when on their visits to this part of the country. But Hubert declined, being anxious to find his horse Jerry, and to test the truth of the robbers' statements concerning him. Several of the guests accompanied Hubert to the spot behind the gibbet, mentioned by the thieves as where Jerry was hidden. When they reached the knoll and looked over, behold, there the horse stood, uninjured, and quite unconcerned. At sight of Hubert he neighed joyfully, and nothing could exceed Hubert's gladness at finding him. He mounted, wished his friends good night and centered off in the direction they pointed out as his nearest way, reaching home safely about 4 o'clock in the morning. Thomas Hardy, slightly simplified. Word meaning: tumult, uproar, groans, to utter a deep prolonged sound expressive of pain, procured, obtained, profusely, generously.
Like, share and subscribe.